Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm sharing my learnings with you so that you can learn better and I can learn more effectively as well. In this video, I'm going to go through a new comp, Exotech Vex or Vexotech, that top players have really been adopting very rapidly. If we look at the stats here, you can see that the pick rate is going up. That's this bottom curve here, and the AVP has been going down as top players are figuring out how to play it. So in this video, I'm going to go through kind of the high level, what the board looks like, how to approach playing it, some augments, and how to itemize, as well as a VOD review where Guubums, who placed first in the Tacticians Trials Day 2, got a first place with this comp. So I'm going to go through a VOD review of how he approached the comp as well. So one thing that I want to call out first from an itemization standpoint is if we look at his spell, he gains 15% Omnivamp and then 150% of overhealing from the ability's damage is converted to bonus true damage. So the Omnivamp is not wasted when he's in the backline and does extra true damage. So that's why, from an itemization standpoint, Gunblade is so good. And blue buff, because he is a 30 mana cost, blue buff basically makes it so that he only needs to auto attack twice before being able to cast again. So blue buff Gunblade is core. Guardbreaker synergizes with Executioner, which already gives him crit, so you don't need more crit for him. So the damage amp from both of these are quite good. And then this is like basically the core of the comp. And it's actually quite flexible as far as what 5 costs you can throw in. Like you can basically throw in almost any of these 5 costs. Like all of these work. And if you are like running, for some reason, if Sejuani and Jax are highly contested, you can actually swap those out for like 2 5 costs, like Diego, which synergizes with Mordekaiser and like Zac, for example. Or even like you could just throw in Rost and Leona as just like a makeshift solution until you find some of the better options. If that's primarily if Sejuani is super contested, which it often is now, because not only are a lot of people playing vertical Exotech with Zeri, but now that this new comp has been discovered, a lot of people are playing this line as well. So I forget if it was, I think Dasik mentioned that Morgana is better than an Aurora 1 because with the Vinacore, I believe it gives Vex something like 20 AP, which just has a lot more value than a single Aurora 1. And so if we go back to this board here, you can cap out this board in a number of ways. You can drop Jax for Renekton at level 9 and take out like a Jhin to then be able to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then like throw in like a Viego. So this can actually cap out your comp. You could probably have Renekton eat your Gragas. But you can play this in so many ways flexibly because you could throw in like Zac and Garen. And Aurora can also throw in Urgot. So there's just so many ways that you could play this flexibly at level 9. But the core is really Divinicore and your... So the core of the build is really like this right here. All right, so these 5 units, you throw in Exotech with like Sejuani. You know, this is what your core looks like, or you can, you know, swap in like this. Because the Dynamo for Vex lets Vex cast even faster. So this is like your super cheap core, and there's so many ways that you could flex into it at level 9. Early game, Usually Morgana is going to be your item holder for your Vex, though Vhagar is really good with blue buff Gunblade as well. So if you happen to just hit a bunch of Vhagars, then you could just lean towards Vhagar reroll instead of this line. So Vhagar reroll would look something like this. So you could do blue buff Gunblade +1. And that's really good with like new high score, for example. But if you slam early with Morgana, then it kind of naturally, this board naturally transitions into this board here. As far as augments go, because your Exotech units, especially if you're playing 5 Exotech here, Exotech boosts your units HP depending on how many items they have. So if you have 5 Exotech, Bulky Buddies synergizes really well because it's a % HP buff. Cyber Deck is quite good for any Exotech lines, gives you a lot more items and HP. Uplink, because you have usually it's Vex and Varus as your primary carries. Well, Vex primary, Varus secondary, and Aurora as well, and Viego. So you have a lot of AP units that would benefit from uplink. Plus, because you have more Exotech items, you can spread them across your Exotech units. We also have Board of Directors, which is good whenever you have 3 or fewer Divinicore, and so you can play that with this variant. Basically, you don't play Renekton and Gragas. You probably pick one of them, or you can take out Morgana, which buffs all of the strength of the Divinicore units. So increases the bonus by 75%, plus a certain amount for each stage. Sated Spellweaver gives, after casting an ability, champions gain 20% Omnivamp for 3 seconds. So because Vex's mana pool is so low with the blue buff, he's going to be casting a lot. And usually this is saved for melee units like Rengar. But because his ability benefits from the overhealing, which is not true for most other units, this Sated Spellweaver is almost like custom made for Vex in this comp. Bulky Buddies we already talked about. Blazing Soul, more attack speed and AP, and all your units will benefit from that. 1 buff, 2 buff. The blue buff goes on Vex. Red buff can go on Varus or Aurora. And these are all just the prismatic versions. Big grab bag because we have a bunch of carries, and Exotech benefits from more items. Spirit Link for Exotech in general, because they have more HP, will benefit from the % healing. Same with Inspiring Epitaph is a % max HP health shield. And Lucky Gloves, because you have so many possible carries, can benefit from as well, especially once you get to level 9. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the VOD review with Guubums.
Figure something else out is all I need to do, and I can make it out.
And we can see how he goes about piloting this comp. So really quickly, he already at the beginning, you can just pull up Team Planner and look at Exotech, and he sees here that he has Hollowbow at 7. Cyber Coil is the worst one, but the other thing I didn't mention is Hollowbow and Hyperfangs are the best performing Varus Exotech items, and then the tank ones are good on Mordekaiser typically and Sejuani. All right, so I'm just gonna skip through to the highlighted points. And you can see he already has a teardrop, is holding on to the Morgana. And Morgana, the way her spell works, it's very similar to set 13 Morgana. She just needs a lot of time and blue buff to be able to apply her spell to the enemy units. So you want a strong front line, and the Vi really helps out with that here. So someone already called Vayne. Because he has the Vi 2, he can try to streak with Cloning Facility here. And he thinks about and does slam the Vow. So keep in mind that in order to play any Fast 8 comp, typically you still want to make sure that you get there with a lot of HP and econ, and the best way to do that is not to greed your tiers for blue buff, but rather to streak. If you're able to have a strong early game, that is the best way to guarantee that you'll be able to get to the end game with plenty of HP and gold. All right, so looking pretty strong early on. Can get a 3 streak here, which is already worth 5 gold. If you think about like a silver augment, 5 gold is like not that far off from silver augment value in the early game. And he can try to shoot for angling towards the comp that we're talking about if he happens to have the right conditions. So gets the cyber coil in, splits up his items. Unfortunately, this opponent looks very strong with 3 tank items on the Mundo. And finds the Morgana here. So now he's thinking of possibly angling in the direction that we're talking about. All right, so I'm skipping ahead to like the main points. So you see here, he's holding the double Vagar. We'll see if he ends up playing it, but he is kind of considering this angle. And I originally thought he was going to play towards Zeri here with he has Rageblade IE and Vow, which is already really good for Sejuani, but is not quite good for the units that he has on the board right now, because he already has a Morgana 2 and an Elise pair. And so any of the cyber augments are good with Exotech because you get more items, and he ends up taking Cyber Bulk, hits the Mord 2, which is pretty high roll, but he valued the Cyber Bulk over the mana one, interestingly, likely because he's playing for tempo right now, and his tanks are much stronger than his carries. So again, we see he's really not trying to greed and force this Vexotech build, but it eventually kind of lands in his lap later. So we see 2 other players already slam Rageblade with decent Zeri items, which could likely be the reason that he decided not to slam Rageblade and contest them, and likely leaned in the direction of playing Vex, which was surprising to me because he didn't have any tiers at this point, and blue buff is quite important to be able to play towards this Vexotech comp. And he slams Spark, so he is pretty much committed towards AP and is not holding. The other viable AP like fast 8 angle is Brand and Ziggs. But because he already has so many of the Exotech, you can see here that he's already like committed to this board here. So he's putting Vex into the planner and is just missing, yeah. That's the core board that I had showed you earlier on. And here is where he kind of gets a high roll. Ends up just naturaling 2 tiers. Of course, you could argue that's not too high roll because the item component pool that he had remaining, because he did not, well, I guess he had 1 tier dropped with this Vow here earlier, but he had pretty good odds of having at least 1 other tier. And while Shojin is not as good on Vex, it's still like serviceable. So he's full on committed to this line now, and we'll see how he navigates this 4-2 roll down. I'm gonna slow it down a little bit. And so he gets reinforcement, which makes it a lot easier, hits the Vex on the first roll, and buys You can pretty much buy all of the 5-cost units. This board is very flexible with the 5-cost units, especially if you can get to level 9. Gets the Aurora in. And with Cloning Facility, Aurora, you can have Aurora put in 2 separate units, which is quite good. He does throw in a Brand, which is probably not as ideal as getting an Urgot in, which could actually be fight diff here, and probably is fight diff here. They're still looking for the Varus, which is actually a very big key missing piece because he gets an extra item for his Cyber Bulk value and Executioner. Right now he doesn't have Executioner in, so that makes a big deal. And he's still looking for his last item on Vex, which ideally would be a Gunblade for that extra healing and true damage. So again, wants to look for that sword for Gunblade. Does end up getting it. Finds the Varus. And because he found the 5 costs, he's already kind of skipping the 5 Exotech version, sells the Jax, and is going straight to including the 5 costs. Notice also that he's putting Vex in the middle. The reason for that is because Vex's ability is AoE around 1 hex around the target unit. So usually other players are clumping in the middle. And if you can hit multiple units with Vex, that just increases their DPS by a lot. So the middle 3 back hexes typically outperform the other hexes by a decent margin. So here we know it's 54, 54, 54.9 versus 53 and 52% win percentage in the corners. We get the Golem, more frontline, which, because Vex has the Gunblade, is somewhat of a sustained comp and benefits from extra frontline. And now we're just pushing for level 9. Would be nice to be able to find the Sejuani too, but it seems like there's a decent number of... I think there might be 1 or 2 other players that are playing Exotech here. And this board looks pretty strong. It's a pretty capped Vayne and Senna reroll board, 1 away from Jarvan 3, and it pretty much steamrolls us pretty hard. So we'll have to see how we can cap out our board at level 9 to try to figure out a way to beat that comp. Landing the Sejuani stun on that Vayne is extremely important. So this healing in the backline, especially against this Brand Ziggs comp, is really valuable because in this set, there's actually a lot of backline access, backline chip damage with Brand, Ziggs, Misfortune, Zed. And that's where Vex really shines, even Aurora, because of that healing value coming in, gives them that extra survivability to be able to sustain the fight. A very close fight against that Zeri player, but we have a lot more gold. So once we push 9, we should be able to beat that player. So the big question mark is how to beat the Vayne reroll player. And now we're just trying to itemize our Aurora. That's going to be our cap out condition, finding an Aurora 2. We push 9, get a Zac in. And Zac is just even more frontline for this Vex. We definitely want to put the Spark with the Mordekaiser right in front of the Vex so that you get that tread. And now we're starting to steamroll some of these opponents. Find the Sejuani 2. Once we find this Aurora 2 and Zac 2, then we're off to the races, and really depends on whether we can possibly beat this Vayne reroll player. This Vhagar reroll also looks fairly strong, but not strong enough. And we haven't even hit Aurora 2. Now we do. Find the Viego. See who we take out for this Viego. So interestingly, takes out the Bastion and plays for Zac for the cap out. Zac, if you can get a lot of blobs going, is one of the best legendaries in the game. It just takes a while to scale up. Got the Urgot 2 coming off the bench. And probably want to find a third item for Aurora. Now our cap looks very strong. We beat this Brand Ziggs player earlier. And looks like we should be able to pull off the same victory. And see, that healing on that Vex was 3,000 right here on the right-hand side. So Vex probably would have died to all that backline access from the Brandon Ziggs, but that matchup seems surprisingly favored in Vex's direction because of the Gunblade. And so now, this same matchup that we lost earlier, now we are at level 9 with an Aurora 2, and we'll see how we do. They did hit a Jarvan 3, and oh, so close. So we'll have to see if we can hit. There's the Zac 2, and we'll have to see if we can outscale them with the Zac 2 and fully itemized with the extra blobs. I'm surprised he put the Vow on the Zac over the Sejuani. But I guess Sejuani's 2 is probably going to cast with the Cyber Coil anyway, and even with the Vow, it's probably not going to cast twice. Get the Crown Guard for extra tank, or actually for your Viego, most likely. And now it's just head-to-head against this Slayer reroll player. Really want to make sure we can get the stun off. The Zed is going to go for the backline, go straight for the Vex, but we see how quickly, even though the Zed went straight for the Vex in the beginning of the fight, Vex healed back up so quickly. But we are still losing. So now we have 2 full 2-star 5 costs to throw in because we have the cloning facility on the Aurora, and we still want to try to find more blobs, and hopefully we can outscale. Sejuani is the correct side against both Vayne and Senna, which is huge. And finally, it looks like this fight is going the right way. The Zac also stunned the Vayne and Senna in that battle, which was also very important. And so now, 73 HP, he basically needs to go undefeated, win out the rest of the way. Move some of the items around, get some... Hits the Sejuani on the right side again. It's huge. And Zac continues to scale. This fight looks a lot better after hitting the Viego too. So you can see that the cap of this board, because it's so flexible on 5 costs, has a huge cap. The Aurora can then throw in like any of your 5 costs. And you have Sejuani for stunning. Gets on the correct side again for the Sejuani, which is huge. This fight looks a little bit closer, but actually ends up not being that close, and can farm items with the Urgot, which is quite important for Exotech and Cyber Bulk value. Decides to put it on the Kobuko instead. This time does not get, because the enemy split the Vayne and Vex, or Vayne and Senna, he decides to put the Sejuani in the middle to probably try to target the Zed instead. Still ends up winning this fight. So you can see that this comp has a very high cap because it is so flexible around the 5 costs. Which does mean that for you to play for win out on this comp, you need to be able to play for level 9. Aurora 2 and a bunch of 5 costs is your win con. Does not move the Sejuani. Little lag there. Much closer fight. That Zac stun is so valuable and does barely eke out the victory. So, to summarize, the big thing is the flexibility around playing around 5 costs. Here, being able to play around Viego, being able to play around Zac, Urgot, Kobuko. We even saw earlier that he threw in the Renekton, is playing around the Aurora. So huge flexibility in 5 costs is what this comp really is strong around. Has a reasonably cheap level 8 board that you can play around. You can see there's only 2 4 costs in Vex and Sejuani at level 8. But as you get to level 9, you can take out, you take out your Jax, you can take out your Jhin, take out your, I guess he keeps the Morgana. But there's a lot of flexibility on what 5 costs you play. And so having extra item components because of that is really valuable, both because you have Exotech to take advantage of the extra HP, and because you have so many carries. You can see here, if he had more items, he can even itemize the Urgot that's going to be thrown in with double the attack speed. He has the Viego fully itemized, have the Zac fully itemized, still missing a 3rd tank item on the Sejuani. Whereas most other comps like this Vayne reroll comp, you have 1, 2, 3, and I guess the Zed 4 units that are capped out. But this comp, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units that are all high quality units that can benefit from items. And so that's why this comp is so powerful right now, and why so many top players are starting to learn how to play it. And I suspect that the play rate of this comp will continue to rise as a result of that. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.